My dad looked me straight in the eyes, called me a burden, picked up my suitcase, and threw it onto the front lawn. Then he pointed toward the driveway and said, "Get out. Don't ever come back." Less than 12 hours later, I was standing inside a breathtaking $30 million Malibu mansion, holding a set of keys with my name on them. The same family who smiled as I walked away would soon realize they had made the biggest mistake of their lives. If this story touches your heart, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Until that night, I truly believed family would always stand by you. I couldn't have been more wrong. My mom passed away when I was 14. After she was gone, everything inside our home changed. My father, Gideon Vale, became distant and cold. At first, I told myself he was grieving, so I tried to be patient. I helped around the house, cooked dinner whenever I could, kept my grades up, and stayed out of trouble. No matter how hard I tried, nothing was ever enough for him. Every problem somehow became my fault. If a bill arrived late, he blamed me. If he had a stressful day at work, he came home angry and took it out on me. It felt like he had decided I was the reason his life had fallen apart. The only person who still believed in me was my grandfather. He always reminded me that my worth wasn't measured by someone else's opinion. Whenever things got difficult, he encouraged me to keep moving forward. But 2 years after my mom died, I lost him too. After his funeral, I felt like I had no one left. The night everything fell apart started with a simple conversation. My father found out I had lost my part-time job because the business had closed. Before I could explain, he exploded with anger. He accused me of being lazy and said I had become nothing but a burden. Then he walked into my room, pulled my suitcase out of the closet, and threw my clothes inside without caring what got damaged. I stood there frozen, hoping he would calm down. Instead, he dragged the suitcase outside and dropped it onto the lawn. "You wanted your own life," he said. "Go live it. You're not welcome here anymore." I looked around, hoping someone would stop him. My aunt stood quietly near the front door. My cousin avoided looking at me. Nobody spoke. Nobody defended me. They simply watched me leave. With nowhere else to go, I loaded my suitcase into my old car and drove until I found a grocery store parking lot. That night, I slept in the driver's seat. I cried until I had no tears left, believing I had lost my family, my home, and my future. Just after sunrise, a gentle knock on my car window woke me up. Outside stood 2 people dressed in business suits. One of them smiled politely and asked if I was the granddaughter of my late grandfather. When I nodded, he said words I never expected to hear. "We've been looking for you. Your grandfather left you an inheritance, and we're here to take you to your new home." I followed the 2 attorneys in my car along the Pacific Coast Highway. My hands shook on the steering wheel the whole drive. Part of me thought this had to be some kind of mistake. Nothing like this had ever happened to me before. About 40 minutes later, we stopped in front of a tall iron gate overlooking the ocean. One of the attorneys entered a security code, and the gate slowly opened. As I drove inside, I saw a beautiful white mansion sitting on a hill with wide glass windows facing the water. The garden was perfectly cared for, and the sound of the waves reached all the way to the front steps. I parked and stepped out, still unable to believe what I was seeing. The older attorney smiled. "Take your time," he said. "This property now belongs to you." I stared at him, waiting for someone to laugh and tell me it was all a misunderstanding. Instead, he handed me a folder filled with legal papers. Every document carried my grandfather's signature. My own name appeared as the legal owner of the house. Before giving me the keys, the younger attorney reached into his briefcase and pulled out a cream-colored envelope sealed with dark blue wax. "This was your grandfather's first instruction," she said quietly. "He asked us to give you this before anything else." My hands trembled as I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. The moment I saw my grandfather's familiar handwriting, my eyes filled with tears. He wrote that if I was reading the letter, then the day he had worried about had finally arrived. He said he never wanted this moment to happen, but deep inside he always believed my father would one day choose anger over love. He didn't write those words with hate. Instead, he sounded heartbroken. He told me not to let bitterness control my heart. There were many things I still didn't know, and judging anyone too quickly would only make the pain heavier. Then he wrote something that made me stop breathing for a second. He said the mansion was never the real inheritance. It was only the beginning. He explained that every answer I had searched for since my mother's death was waiting for me, but I had to be patient. He asked me to trust him one last time and promised that each letter would reveal another piece of the truth. By the end, I would understand why he had made every decision he did. I folded the letter carefully and held it against my chest. For the first time in years, I felt like someone had truly seen my pain. The attorneys gave me a few minutes alone before showing me through the house. Every room was fully furnished, yet nothing felt cold or unfamiliar. It was as if my grandfather had prepared a safe place where I could finally breathe. Before leaving, the older attorney stopped at the front door. "There are more letters," he said. "Your grandfather left very specific instructions about when each one should be opened. We'll guide you through everything." As the front door closed behind them, I stood alone in the silent mansion, holding the first letter in my hands. For the first time, I realized my grandfather had been protecting me long before I even knew I needed protection. I spent most of the afternoon walking through the mansion, trying to take everything in. Every room reminded me that my life had changed overnight. I still couldn't believe my grandfather had planned all of this without ever telling me. As the sun began to set, I heard the sound of several cars stopping outside the front gate. A few minutes later, the security system buzzed. The guard informed me that my father and several relatives were demanding to come inside. I hadn't called any of them. I hadn't even spoken to anyone since leaving my father's house. Before I could answer, I saw them through the security cameras. My father stood at the front with a hard look on his face. My aunt and cousin were behind him, along with two other relatives who had barely spoken to me in years. I told the guard to let them through. The moment they walked inside, everyone looked around at the mansion instead of looking at me. Their eyes moved across the high ceilings, expensive furniture, and the view of the ocean. The same people who hadn't cared where I slept the night before suddenly seemed very interested in my life. My father finally broke the silence. "Explain this," he demanded. "How did you get all of this?" I calmly told him the truth. "Grandpa left it to me." He laughed as if I had insulted him. "That's impossible," he said. "You must have pressured him before he died. He would never leave everything to you." The accusation didn't even surprise me. One relative claimed I had hidden my grandfather's will. Another suggested I had tricked him while he was sick. They spoke over one another, each coming up with a different reason why I didn't deserve what I had inherited. Not one person asked how I was feeling. Not one person apologized for watching me get thrown out the night before. I listened quietly until everyone finished talking. Then I looked at my father. "The lawyers have every legal document," I said. "If you think something was done illegally, you're free to speak with them." He had no answer. The room became silent for a few seconds. I walked toward the front door and opened it. "I think it's time for all of you to leave." My father stared at me, expecting me to change my mind. I didn't. One by one, they walked out without another word. My father was the last to leave. Before stepping outside, he turned back and said this wasn't over. After the gate closed behind them, the house became peaceful again. That evening, I made myself a cup of tea and sat beside the large windows overlooking the ocean. The attorneys had left another sealed envelope inside the study with instructions not to open it until I was alone. I carefully broke the seal. My grandfather's handwriting greeted me once again. This letter was much shorter than the first. He wrote that the hardest part of the journey was about to begin because the truth always makes people uncomfortable. Then came the sentence that stayed in my mind long after I finished reading. "For nearly 20 years, someone in this family has been protecting a lie instead of protecting you." I read those words again and again. Suddenly, I understood why my grandfather wanted me to be patient. The story I had believed about my family was only part of the truth. I barely slept that night. My grandfather's words kept repeating in my mind. By morning, I knew I couldn't rush through this. If he had gone to so much trouble to leave these letters, there had to be a reason for revealing everything one step at a time. Later that day, the attorneys returned. They brought several boxes that had been kept in my grandfather's private office. One of them handed me another sealed envelope. "He wanted you to read this one before looking through anything else," the attorney said. After they left, I sat down in the library and carefully opened the letter. My grandfather began by saying he was sorry for every time I believed I was facing life alone. He explained that he had made a promise to my mother before she passed away. He promised he would watch over me, even if I never knew he was doing it. As I kept reading, one memory after another started making sense. He admitted that he had quietly paid my college tuition after my scholarship no longer covered all my expenses. I remembered wondering why the school suddenly told me my balance had been cleared. I had assumed it was a mistake. He also revealed that when I couldn't afford the deposit for my first apartment after graduation, he had arranged for someone else to pay it without telling me. At the time, I thought the landlord had simply decided to trust me. Then came another surprise. The first full-time job I ever received hadn't happened by chance. My grandfather had spoken to the company owner years earlier. He never asked anyone to hire me because of family connections. He only asked them to give me a fair interview. Everything after that had been earned through my own work. I sat quietly, trying to take it all in. For years, my father had told me I would never succeed without him. Yet every important step in my life had been protected by the one person who never expected anything in return. The letter became more personal near the end. My grandfather wrote that every time my father called me a failure, he felt his heart break. He wanted to step in many times, but he believed I needed the chance to build confidence through my own achievements instead of depending on someone else's money. He said real strength comes from overcoming hardship, not avoiding it. When I folded the letter, I noticed a small note tucked inside. It listed several dates from my childhood. At first, they looked ordinary, but then I recognized them. They were the days when strange things had happened. The summer camp I suddenly couldn't attend. The music lessons that ended without explanation. The family vacation where I had been left behind because my father claimed we couldn't afford another ticket. My grandfather had circled every date in red ink. Someone wanted me to look deeper. Those moments were not random memories. They were connected. I placed the note beside the other letters and made a decision. I wasn't ready to face my father again. Not until I uncovered every piece of the truth my grandfather had spent years protecting. The next morning, I carried the boxes from my grandfather's office into the study. They were filled with neatly labeled folders, old notebooks, bank papers, and personal records. Everything had been organized with care, almost as if he knew someone would need to understand it one day. I started with the oldest files. Most of them contained normal family paperwork, but one folder had my name written across the front. My heartbeat sped up as I opened it. Inside were copies of bank statements, legal agreements, and handwritten notes. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then I noticed several payments that had been transferred into an account created for me when I was a child. The account was supposed to help pay for my education, my first home, and anything I needed when I became an adult. But the balance kept dropping over the years. Page after page showed money being withdrawn. Each withdrawal had the same authorized signature. My father's. I stared at the papers, hoping I had misunderstood something. I checked the dates again. The money disappeared little by little over many years. It wasn't one mistake. It was a pattern. My grandfather had written small notes beside several transactions. Not approved. Asked him to replace the funds. No response. Those short sentences hit me harder than I expected. I reached for another sealed envelope lying beneath the folder. This was the fourth letter. My grandfather wrote that he had prayed I would never need to read it. He said he wanted to believe my father would correct his mistakes before it was too late. Sadly, that day never came. He explained that every document I had found was real. For years, he quietly collected copies because he feared important records might disappear after his death. He wasn't trying to destroy his own son. He was trying to protect his granddaughter. His words were calm, without anger or blame. He wrote that people often reveal who they truly are through small choices repeated over many years. One selfish decision becomes another until it feels normal. By the time the damage is impossible to hide, everyone believes it happened suddenly. That sentence stayed with me. My father hadn't thrown me out because of one argument. The argument had simply been the final excuse. The rejection I felt that night had started years earlier, one decision at a time. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. So many painful memories suddenly looked different. Every broken promise. Every opportunity one lost. Every time I was told I wasn't good enough. It wasn't because I lacked ability. Someone had been making sure I stayed dependent while pretending it was for my own good. For the first time, I stopped asking myself what I had done wrong. Instead, I began asking why my father had spent so many years hiding the truth. I carefully returned every document to the folder. These papers weren't just old financial records anymore. They were proof that my grandfather hadn't left me a mansion because he felt sorry for me. He left it because he knew one day I would need a safe place after discovering just how deep the betrayal really went. I couldn't bring myself to open the next letter right away. Everything I had learned so far had changed the way I looked at my childhood. I needed time to accept it before I was ready for another truth. That evening, I carried the sealed envelope onto the back patio. The sun was beginning to set over the ocean, and the sound of the waves made the silence feel less heavy. I broke the seal and unfolded the pages. My grandfather began by saying that this would be the hardest letter for me to read. He wrote that my mother loved me more deeply than words could ever describe. Even during the final weeks of her illness, she never stopped thinking about my future. While everyone else focused on her health, she was quietly making plans to protect me. She met with lawyers. She wrote personal instructions. She organized important papers. She even made a list of dreams she hoped I would one day achieve. My hands tightened around the letter. I had spent years believing she left this world before she had the chance to think about me. I was wrong. My grandfather explained that a few days before she passed away, she asked to speak with him alone. She told him she was worried. Not because she was dying, because she was afraid of what would happen to me after she was gone. She said my father had already started making decisions that frightened her. He had become controlling, impatient, and unwilling to listen whenever they disagreed about raising me. She feared that without someone watching over me, I would grow up believing I wasn't good enough. So she asked my grandfather for one promise. Please don't let my daughter face life alone. Those were the exact words she had spoken. As I read them, tears rolled down my face. He told her he would always protect me, even if he had to do it quietly. That promise became the reason behind everything he had done over the years. He also explained that my mother had prepared savings, letters, and legal instructions meant for my future. She wanted those resources used for my education, my first home, and the beginning of my adult life. After her death, those plans slowly disappeared. Some were ignored. Others were changed. A few were never mentioned again. My grandfather spent years trying to preserve what he could without creating a battle that might hurt me even more. Near the end of the letter, he included something unexpected. It was a copy of a page from my mother's journal. Her handwriting was soft and familiar. She wrote that she hoped I would grow into a kind woman who never measured her value by the opinions of people who failed to see her heart. She believed I would face difficult days, but she hoped I would never mistake rejection for truth. The final sentence nearly broke me. It said, "If one day you feel alone, remember that my love didn't end when my life did." I held that page against my chest for a long time. For years, I had quietly wondered why my mother hadn't done more to protect me. Now I finally understood. She had tried. She had fought until she had no strength left. The people who were supposed to honor her wishes had chosen a different path. That night, I stopped feeling abandoned by my mother. Instead, I felt closer to her than I had since the day I lost her. And for the first time in many years, the emptiness I had carried inside my heart began to fade. The following morning, I met my grandfather's attorney and accountant at their downtown office. They had worked with him for many years, and it was clear they had been waiting for this meeting. The attorney placed several thick binders on the conference table. "Your grandfather wanted you to see these only after reading the first 5 letters," he said. I nodded, already knowing nothing inside would be easy to hear. The accountant opened the first binder and showed me records covering nearly 20 years. Every page was carefully organized with dates, signatures, and supporting documents. He explained that my grandfather owned several investments and properties. Some were meant to stay in the family, while others had been planned for my future. The problem was that my father had never told anyone the complete truth about those assets. Instead, he handled family business as though everything belonged to him alone. Whenever relatives asked questions, he always had an explanation ready. He claimed certain investments had failed or that properties had been sold years earlier. Nobody questioned him because they trusted him. My grandfather didn't. Whenever something didn't seem right, he quietly requested copies of financial records. Over time, he realized important information was being hidden. The attorney handed me another folder. Inside were letters my grandfather had sent to my father over the years. They weren't angry. They simply asked him to correct missing records, replace money that didn't belong to him, and be honest with the family. My father either ignored the letters or gave excuses that never solved anything. He always promised to fix it later, the attorney said softly. Later never came. Then he showed me the document that mattered most. Several years before my grandfather passed away, he had completely updated his estate plan. He knew there might be arguments after his death. He knew some people would challenge his decisions. So he built strong legal protections around everything he wanted me to receive. Every property, every account, and every instruction had been reviewed more than once. Independent witnesses had signed every important document. There was no legal way for anyone to change his wishes. My grandfather had thought of everything. The attorney smiled for the first time since I arrived. "He loved you very much," he said. "He wanted your future to depend on the truth, not on anyone else's approval." As I looked through the final papers, I realized something else. My father's reputation had been built on a story that wasn't true. For years, relatives believed he had carried the family through difficult times. They thought he had managed everything fairly and honestly. The records told a different story. Piece by piece, the image he had created was beginning to fall apart. I didn't feel happy about it. I didn't celebrate. Mostly, I felt sad. The man who had spent years trying to convince me I was the family disappointment had been hiding his own mistakes all along. When I left the office that afternoon, I carried only one folder with me. It contained enough proof to answer every question I still had. For the first time, I knew I wasn't fighting rumors anymore. I was standing on the truth. A week after my meeting with the attorney, the phone calls started coming one after another. At first, I ignored them. Most of the numbers belonged to relatives who had not spoken to me in years. Some even left cheerful voice messages, acting as if nothing had ever happened between us. Then my aunt called. Her voice sounded unusually gentle. She asked if we could meet because the family was going through a difficult time. She said everyone had made mistakes and that this was the moment to come together. I agreed to meet her at a quiet restaurant near the beach. When I arrived, I realized she wasn't alone. My father, my cousin, and 2 other relatives were already sitting at the table. No one had mentioned that on the phone. For a moment, I thought about leaving, but I stayed. The conversation started with small talk that felt forced. They asked about the mansion, the weather, and whether I had settled in. Then my father finally got to the point. He admitted the family business was struggling. Several investments had failed, bills were piling up, and they needed financial help to keep everything from falling apart. He looked at me as though helping them was the obvious thing to do. "We're still family," he said. I listened without interrupting. Not once did anyone apologize. No one mentioned the night I slept alone in my car. No one admitted they had accused me of lying or trying to steal my grandfather's inheritance. They wanted my money. They still didn't want to face the truth. I took a slow breath before answering. "I hope things work out for all of you," I said calmly. "But I'm not going to solve problems I didn't create." My father frowned. "So you're just going to watch your family suffer?" I looked at him for a few seconds. I already know what it feels like to suffer while my family watches. The table became completely silent. Nobody had a response. I stood up, placed enough cash on the table to cover my meal, and picked up my purse. Before leaving, I looked around at each of them. "I don't hate any of you," I said, "but I won't let guilt decide my future anymore." Then I walked away. As I stepped outside, I expected to feel angry. Instead, I felt surprisingly peaceful. For years, I believed saying no would make me a selfish person. Now I understood there was a difference between kindness and allowing people to use you. That evening, I returned home and walked through the quiet rooms of the mansion. For the first time since inheriting it, the house truly felt like mine. Not because of its size or its value. Because it was the one place where nobody could force me to earn love by sacrificing myself. I stood on the balcony as the sun disappeared into the ocean. My grandfather had given me far more than a beautiful home. He had given me the freedom to make my own choices without fear. And that freedom was worth more than anything money could ever buy. A few days passed before I felt ready to open the final envelope. I had kept it inside the drawer beside my bed, untouched. Somehow I knew that once I read those last words, there would be no more answers waiting for me. This would be the end of the journey my grandfather had prepared. That evening, I made a cup of tea and sat in the living room facing the ocean. The house was quiet. The only sound was the waves rolling onto the shore. I opened the envelope carefully. The first line made me smile through my tears. My grandfather wrote that if I had reached this letter, then I was stronger than I believed. He said he hoped I had stopped blaming myself for the choices other people made. For so many years, I had carried guilt that never belonged to me. He wanted me to put it down forever. As I continued reading, he explained why he had chosen to leave me the Malibu mansion. It was never about showing off wealth. It was never meant to punish anyone. He said every person deserves one place in the world where they feel safe, respected, and welcome. He wanted this home to become that place for me. He reminded me of something he used to tell me when I was little. A house becomes a home because of the people you allow inside. Back then, I never understood what he meant. Now I finally did. He told me not to waste my future trying to win love from people who had already decided not to give it. Real love never asks someone to prove they deserve kindness. Then he wrote about forgiveness. He said forgiving someone does not mean pretending nothing happened. It simply means refusing to let the pain control the rest of your life. Whether I forgave my father or not would always be my choice. No one else had the right to make that decision for me. Near the end of the letter, his words became even more personal. He said he had always admired my quiet strength. Even during the hardest years, I never became cruel. I never stopped caring about other people, even when life gave me many reasons to give up. He hoped I would never lose that part of myself. Finally, I reached the last paragraph. He wrote that true wealth is not measured by money, expensive homes, or family names. True wealth is waking up each morning with peace in your heart and having the freedom to choose who deserves a place in your life. That freedom, he said, could never be bought or taken away. I slowly folded the letter and held it against my chest. For a long time, I simply sat there watching the waves. The questions that had followed me since childhood were finally answered. I understood my mother's love. I understood my grandfather's sacrifices. Most importantly, I understood my own value. I no longer needed anyone's approval to believe I was enough. As the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, I whispered a quiet thank you. Not for the mansion. Not for the inheritance. But for giving me the truth before it was too late. For the first time in my life, my heart felt completely at peace. Several months passed, and life slowly found a new rhythm. The mansion no longer felt strange or overwhelming. It became a place where I could finally relax without waiting for the next argument or cruel comment. Every room carried a sense of peace that I had never experienced growing up. I didn't fill the house with expensive things. Instead, I filled it with simple moments that made me happy. Friends who had stood beside me during my hardest days came over for dinner. My elderly neighbor, who lived alone, often joined us for coffee. The staff who worked on the property became people I respected, not just employees. Little by little, the house became a real home. I also started supporting a scholarship program at a local college in my grandfather's name. I knew how much education had meant to him. If I could help even one student who felt forgotten the way I once had, it would honor everything he believed in. One afternoon, the front gate security called to tell me someone wanted to see me. It was my father. For several minutes, I stood inside the house thinking about whether I should meet him. Finally, I asked the guard to let him in. When he walked through the front door, he looked older than I remembered. The confidence he always carried was gone. He stood quietly, looking around without saying a word. After a long silence, he looked at me. I was wrong, he said. There was no anger in his voice. No excuses. No blaming anyone else. He admitted he had made choices that pushed me away little by little until there was nothing left between us. He said he had spent months thinking about everything that had happened and wished he could go back and change it. Then he asked the question I always imagined hearing, "Can you forgive me?" I took a deep breath before answering. "I don't want to spend my life carrying hate," I said. "So yes, I forgive you." He looked relieved for a moment. Then I continued, "But forgiveness doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't bring back the years we lost. And it doesn't mean things go back to the way they were." He slowly nodded. I think he finally understood. We spoke for a little while longer before he quietly left. As I watched him drive away, I didn't feel victory. I didn't feel revenge. I only felt acceptance. Some broken things can be repaired. Others can only be remembered. That evening, I walked onto the balcony with my grandfather's final letter in my hands. The ocean stretched out before me, calm and endless, just as it had the day I first arrived. I looked up at the sky and smiled. "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. Thank you for keeping your promise to my mother. Thank you for giving me a future instead of letting my past decide who I would become." The mansion was an incredible gift, but it was never the greatest one. The greatest inheritance my grandfather left me was the truth. Because once I finally knew my worth, no one could ever make me feel unwanted again.